The grand hall of the Crimson Peak Kingdom stood like a fortress of power, echoing with centuries of royal bloodlines, ancient traditions, and forgotten secrets. The kingdom was ruled by its most revered king, Damien Ashford, the Silver Wolf King, feared and adored in equal measure. His name alone was enough to send a ripple of awe and reverence throughout the land. His strength was legendary, his wolf form a terrifying sight, a creature of silver-white fur and eyes that glowed with the fierce light of the moon itself. But even the strongest kings had their weaknesses. For Damien, it was the quest for his mate, a challenge that had plagued him for years. The moon goddess had whispered of his Luna, a woman who would be his equal, his balance, his other half. But as the years passed and his kingdom flourished, that fateful bond had yet to reveal itself. Today, the grand hall was filled with the sounds of whispered conversations, the soft shuffle of silk gowns against the polished marble floors, and the unmistakable scent of expensive perfumes hanging in the air. It was the day of the selection ceremony, a long-standing tradition in the kingdom. 100 women, each more beautiful and powerful than the last, stood waiting for their chance to be chosen as his mate. Each one had bloodlines that could trace back to the greatest warriors, the most influential families, the strongest alphas. They were all vying for one thing: the Alpha King's favor. The women were immaculate, their presence commanding the room. Some had perfected their smiles, others had mastered the art of seduction, but all of them carried the weight of their lineage, and their eyes were locked on Damien, standing at the head of the hall. Lady Victoria, the daughter of the powerful Duke Harrington, glided forward with the grace of a predator. Her crimson dress clung to her powerful frame, her every step oozing confidence. Her eyes, a sharp contrast of amber and emerald, flashed with ambition. She was not just beautiful. She was cunning, determined to win Damien's heart and secure her position as Luna. Next was Lady Morgana, a fierce warrior from the Northern Territories. Her battle scars were displayed proudly on her arms, and her stature was one of command. She had fought in wars that had shaped the very land they stood upon. Her piercing green eyes held a fire that was impossible to ignore, and her every move radiated power. And then there was Lady Celestia, the Enchantress. With eyes that shimmered like the stars themselves, she possessed a magic that was said to rival even the moon goddesses. Her allure was intoxicating, and there was an air of mystery around her that no one could quite figure out. She was known for her intelligence and her magical prowess, a combination that made her a dangerous contender in the ceremony. But Damien's eyes were not on them. As the women presented themselves before him, he stood tall, his expression unreadable, his wolf silent, distant. His mind was not on the ceremony. His thoughts drifted, as they always did, to the woman who had yet to show herself. The one he could not see, the one whose scent had not yet reached him. The moon goddess had told him she would come, but she had not. And his wolf, the beast that lived within him, was growing restless. He could feel it, deep within his bones, the gnawing emptiness that would not be filled until he found her. His mate. The crowd held its breath as Lady Victoria approached, her presence demanding attention. She stopped before him, her eyes meeting his with a mix of respect and desire. She lowered herself into a graceful curtsy, her voice smooth as she spoke. "Your Majesty, I offer my strength, my loyalty, and my bloodline to serve you and this kingdom." Damien's gaze swept over her, but his wolf did not stir. It was a strange thing, this feeling of emptiness, of longing, of waiting for something that he could not grasp. His eyes flickered to the next woman, and then the next. But there was nothing. No bond, no connection. His wolf growled softly, frustrated but still silent. The tension in the hall was palpable. Lady Victoria stood tall, waiting for a sign, but the moment passed without a word from Damien. He simply nodded, acknowledging her, but offering nothing more. "Next," he said coldly, his voice carrying throughout the hall. The next woman stepped forward. It was then that the doors to the hall creaked open, the sound sharp and jarring against the heavy silence that had settled over the room. Every eye turned to the entrance. Damien's gaze snapped up. He could feel something shift in the air, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The crowd parted as a figure stepped into the hall, and the air seemed to freeze. It wasn't just the woman who had walked in. It was the very presence she carried with her. She was small, no more than 5 feet 2 inches tall, with long, wild hair that hung in loose waves down her back, the color of rich mahogany. Her skin was pale, almost luminous, but it was her eyes. Her eyes were what captured the attention of everyone in the room. They were a strange shade of slate gray, with a depth that seemed to reach into the very soul of whoever dared to meet them. The woman stood alone in the doorway, her body slightly hunched, as if she were trying to make herself small in a room full of powerful figures. Her clothes were plain, threadbare at the edges, the simple servant's garb that barely held together. She did not belong here. Not with the duchesses, not with the warriors, not with the enchantresses. She was an Omega, the lowest of the low in their society. And yet, despite her humble appearance, there was a strange power that emanated from her, an unspoken strength that was both quiet and commanding. The room held its breath. Damien's wolf stirred, the tension crackling through the air. For the first time in years, Damien felt something, an unfamiliar, gut-wrenching pull deep within him. His gaze locked onto her, and in that moment, he knew. This was her. His Luna. The women in the hall murmured, some confused, some outraged. How could she, an Omega, be chosen? She was nothing compared to the women who had paraded before him. She had no bloodline, no power, no strength. Nothing. She was beneath him. But Damien knew. His wolf howled, the bond thrumming through him like wildfire. This woman, this Omega, was his mate. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the vast hall like a gathering storm. But Damien remained focused, his entire being attuned to this moment, to this woman who had just walked into his life and turned everything upside down. He stood up, his gaze fixed on her as the rest of the room fell into stunned silence. You, Damien said, his voice low, powerful and unwavering. You are my Luna. The shock was immediate. The murmurs began, but Damien silenced them with a single, piercing glare. His voice cut through the tension in the room like a blade. The Omega girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with confusion and fear, but she did not speak. She did not move. The world around her had come to a halt. She had never been part of this world. She had never belonged. But now she was being thrust into it. Damien stepped down from the platform, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. His hand reached out, gently lifting her chin to meet his eyes. There was no hesitation, no doubt in his actions. You are my mate, he said again, his words final. And this kingdom is yours, as much as it is mine. The room fell completely silent, the weight of his declaration heavy in the air. The women who had once been vying for his attention now stood frozen in disbelief. They had been waiting for their moment, for their chance to claim their place beside the king, but it had been taken by a mere Omega. Damien turned to face the room, his eyes hard, his voice filled with power. This ceremony is over. The selection is finished. My Luna has been found. The grand hall had erupted in chaos, but amidst it all, Damien Ashford stood resolute, his gaze locked onto the silent Omega girl before him. The noise of murmurs, gasps, and outraged whispers filled the room like a distant storm, but they were nothing to him. His wolf had claimed her, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. The women who had spent years preparing for this day, each one expecting to be chosen as the king's Luna, were now rendered insignificant. Their hopes shattered like glass beneath the weight of his declaration. Lady Victoria, whose eyes had glistened with ambition, stared at the Omega girl as though she had been struck by lightning. Her jaw clenched, her fists balled at her sides as the sting of humiliation threatened to undo her composure. She had come here to secure a crown, to secure her future. But now it was slipping through her fingers like sand. Damien, however, paid no attention to her or the others. His focus was entirely on the woman before him, the woman who had walked into the hall unnoticed by anyone but him. There was something in the way she stood, small, trembling, and yet impossibly strong, that pulled at him like gravity. The air around them thickened as he took a step closer. She had yet to speak, and in the silence, the weight of her own confusion seemed to press down on her like a physical force. Her slate-gray eyes flicked up to meet his, wide with disbelief. It was as if she were trying to understand the meaning of his words, as if she could not comprehend the reality of what was happening. "You," she began, her voice a soft whisper, barely audible over the tension in the room. Damien's heart tightened as he saw the fear in her eyes, the way she shrunk back slightly as though unsure of how to react to him. He wasn't sure why, but that fear ignited something fierce inside of him, a need to protect her, to shield her from the harshness of the world that had cast her aside for so long. He reached out slowly, gently this time, lowering his voice as he spoke directly to her. "You are mine, Luna. You've always been mine. The moon goddess has guided me to you, and I will never let you go." Her eyes shifted from his face to the ground, as though she could not bear the weight of his words. She was overwhelmed, as anyone would be in her position. She had spent her life hidden in the shadows, unseen, unheard, and now she was being thrust into the light, into a role she had never asked for. "Why me?" Her voice cracked as she finally spoke, her lips trembling slightly. "I am nothing. I have nothing to offer. I'm just an Omega." Damien's chest tightened at her words. Her vulnerability, her self-doubt, it only made him want her more. "You are everything," he said, his voice low but powerful. "The moon goddess does not make mistakes. You are my mate. You are my Luna, and that is all that matters." The room fell into a stunned silence as Damien reached for her again, this time pulling her gently toward him. She flinched at the touch, but he didn't back away. He could feel her hesitation, but he could also feel the pull between them, the undeniable connection that was beginning to form. His heart raced as he felt her breath against his chest, the faint tremble of her body against his. "Come with me," he whispered, his voice a command but gentle all the same. "Let me take you somewhere safe, away from their eyes." Her gaze flicked nervously to the crowd that surrounded them, their eyes burning with jealousy, suspicion, and anger. She had never been part of this world, the world of kings, queens, and power. She was just a servant, an invisible soul in the shadows, and now she was standing at the center of it all. Damien turned to face the crowd, his presence commanding the room like a force of nature. "The ceremony is over. My Luna has been found. I will hear no further arguments." The murmurs grew louder, but Damien silenced them with a single, piercing glance. His power was absolute. No one would dare defy him, not in his own court, not when he had claimed his mate. He turned back to the Omega girl, his expression softening as he reached out to touch her cheek, his thumb brushing against her skin with an almost reverent tenderness. "Come with me," he said again, his tone low, urging her to trust him. For a moment she stood frozen, staring at him as though she were caught between the world she had known and the one he was offering her. The weight of her fear, her uncertainty, was palpable, but there was something in his eyes, a promise, an assurance, that made her take a tentative step forward. As they walked out of the grand hall together, the silence that had once enveloped the room followed them. The nobles, the women, the courtiers, they watched, their gazes filled with a mixture of disbelief, resentment, and confusion. But none of it mattered to Damien. His wolf was howling in his chest, and nothing would stop him from claiming the woman who was rightfully his. The Omega girl, still trembling, followed him through the halls of the castle. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, her mind racing with questions she couldn't yet form. Why had he chosen her? Why had the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the land, chosen someone like her. Someone so small, so weak, so invisible. Damien led her to a private chamber at the heart of the castle, away from the prying eyes of the court. It was a place of quiet solitude, filled with the soft glow of candlelight and the scent of lavender and cedar. He gently closed the door behind them and turned to face her, his eyes soft but intense. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low. "No one will hurt you here." She nodded slowly, but her eyes were filled with doubt. "Why me?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm nothing. I'm just an Omega." Damien's heart clenched at her words. How could she not see it? How could she not understand the significance of their bond? "Because you are everything," he said firmly. "The bond between us is not about strength or power. It is something deeper, something that cannot be broken. You are my Luna, and together we will lead this kingdom." Her eyes flicked to the floor, as though the weight of his words was too much for her to bear. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to be anything. I've spent my whole life in the shadows." Damien stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her chin, lifting her gaze to meet his. "You don't have to be anything but yourself. You are perfect as you are. I will protect you, and I will teach you what it means to be my Luna." For the first time she saw something in his eyes that was more than just the power of a king. There was a tenderness there, a warmth that made her feel as though, for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. She wasn't invisible. Damien's lips curved into a small, reassuring smile as he drew her closer. "You will never be alone again." As they stood there, their hearts beating in unison, the weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders. For the first time, she felt a spark of hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, she could belong. And as Damien wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into the protective embrace of his strength, she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same. The moon hung high above the Crimson Peak Kingdom, casting its ethereal glow over the castle and the sprawling lands beyond. Inside the grand halls, the echoes of the day's events lingered in the air like the remnants of a storm. The Alpha King had made his choice. The Omega Girl, unseen, unheard, and now thrust into the very heart of his world, was his Luna. And in the days that followed, the kingdom began to stir, uncertain and rife with whispers. Damien stood at the balcony of his private chambers, gazing out at the lands he ruled. His kingdom stretched out before him like a tapestry woven with power, loyalty, and blood. Yet, despite his vast influence, his eyes were drawn to the woman he had claimed. The woman who had once been invisible, lost in the shadows of a world that had overlooked her. He had never expected this. The moon goddess had guided him to her, to Lily, the silent Omega. She had appeared to him in the grand hall, a mere whisper of a person, and yet she had captured his heart. His wolf had recognized her in an instant, and the bond between them had flared to life with a force he had never known. It was primal. It was instinctive. It was undeniable. Damien's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. His beta, Marcus, entered without waiting for permission, his expression stoic. Yet there was an underlying tension in his eyes. "Your Majesty?" Marcus began, his voice respectful, but filled with concern. "The court is restless. The nobles are questioning your decision. The selection ceremony, it did not go as they expected." Damien's gaze hardened as he turned to face his friend, his beta. He had known this was coming. The nobles of the kingdom were steeped in tradition, their bloodlines and power running deep. They would not take kindly to the Alpha King choosing an Omega girl as his Luna. She was nothing in their eyes, just a servant, a shadow, a nobody. "I don't care about their questions, Marcus," Damien said firmly, his voice steady with authority. "This kingdom will bend to the will of the moon goddess, and she has chosen Lily. She is my Luna." Marcus hesitated before speaking again, his voice low, as though weighing his words carefully. "I understand, Your Majesty." But you know as well as I do that the court's disapproval could have consequences. The nobles are not fools. They will not take this lightly. Damien turned away from him, walking to the edge of the balcony and looking out at the moonlit landscape. He could feel the weight of the crown pressing down on him. His decisions, his actions, they affected everything. His people, his kingdom, his future. I have made my choice, he said quietly, but with unshakable resolve. And Lily is the one who will stand beside me. Let them murmur. Let them question. I will not be moved. Marcus studied him for a moment before nodding, his face softening with understanding. Very well, but you should know that there are already rumors spreading through the court. Some believe this bond between you and Lily is unnatural. There is talk of a challenge to your rule. Damien's jaw clenched. A challenge? He would not let anyone threaten his kingdom, least of all because of a bond the moon goddess herself had forged. The bond between him and Lily was sacred. It was not something to be taken lightly. I will deal with whatever comes, Damien said, his voice unwavering. But Lily, she needs time. She's not used to this world, Marcus. She's not like the others. Marcus's gaze softened as he nodded in understanding. You've given her the kingdom, Damien, but she hasn't yet learned how to carry it. That will take time. And patience. Damien sighed, rubbing his hand across his face. He had spent years learning the weight of the crown, the weight of leadership. But this was different. Lily was different. She wasn't a woman who had been groomed for power, for politics, for a life of royalty. She was a woman who had spent her life hiding in the shadows, unseen and unheard. And now she was expected to stand by his side as his equal. The thought of what she must be feeling twisted in his chest. He had seen her fear, her hesitation. She didn't want this life. Not yet. She was still learning what it meant to be his Luna, to be part of a world so far removed from the one she had known. I'll give her time, Damien said softly, more to himself than to Marcus. But I need her by my side. She's the only one who can help me lead this kingdom into the future. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You're not alone in this, Your Majesty. We all stand with you. And when Lily is ready, she'll stand beside you too. Lily sat by the fire in the private chambers that had been prepared for her, staring into the flames. She had been in the castle for days now, yet it still felt like a dream, like she was an outsider watching from the sidelines. The life she had known, the simple, quiet existence she had once lived, felt like a distant memory. The king's rooms were nothing like the cold stone walls of the kitchens, where she had spent most of her life. The furniture was ornate, the tapestries rich with color. Everything was soft and plush. It was a world of luxury, of power, of expectation. And then there was Damien, the Alpha King, her mate. He had declared it. He had claimed her before the entire court, and despite everything, despite the chaos, the doubts, the whispers, she couldn't bring herself to believe it. She couldn't bring herself to believe that a man like him, someone so powerful, so regal, could want someone like her. She had spent her life in the shadows, hidden from the world, and now she was being thrust into the spotlight. She was supposed to stand by his side, to be his Luna. But how could she? How could she fit into a world so foreign to her? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. She turned, startled, as the door slowly opened, revealing Damien. His presence filled the room like a storm, his form tall and imposing, yet there was a softness in his eyes that made her heart race. I brought you something, he said quietly, stepping into the room and holding out a small wooden box. Lily hesitated for a moment before reaching out to take it from him. The box was intricately carved, the design delicate and beautiful. She opened it slowly, revealing a simple silver necklace with a crescent moon pendant. It glowed softly in the dim light of the fire. This is for you, Damien said, his voice gentle. A symbol of our bond. The moon goddess has blessed us, Lily, and she has chosen you to stand beside me. Her fingers traced the pendant, her breath catching in her throat. She had never worn jewelry before. She had never been a part of a world where such things mattered. And yet, here she was, holding the symbol of the very thing that terrified her. The bond between them. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Damien stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently lift her chin, guiding her gaze to meet his. "Because you are mine," he said softly, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "And I will never let you go. Together, we will face everything that comes." For a moment they stood there in silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a promise. Lily felt the pull between them, the connection that had been forged in the fire of the moon goddess's will, and for the first time a small spark of something, hope, maybe, ignited in her chest. "Together," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Damien smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened his features. "Yes, together." The days after Damien's declaration were a whirlwind of changes for Lily. She had stepped into a world of lavish rooms, royal attire, and courtly duties that felt as foreign to her as the stars in the sky. Despite the kindness and patience Damien showed her, the weight of the crown, both his and now hers, was something she could hardly grasp. But there was something else, something deeper, that was beginning to change within her. The bond that had connected her to him in an instant, binding them in a way that she couldn't yet fully understand. She had spent most of her life hidden, silent, and unnoticed. And now, in the castle, in the heart of the kingdom, she was everything but that. The nobles watched her every move, waiting for her to slip up, to fail. They whispered about her low status, her quiet demeanor, the fact that she had come from the kitchens, from the lowest of the low. But Damien had stood beside her, his presence a shield against their judgments, their cruelty. And more than that, he had shown her something she had never seen in another person. Complete, unwavering belief in her. Each night he would sit with her by the fire in their private chambers, his gaze soft but intense. He would ask her questions, tell her stories of the kingdom, of battles won, of sacrifices made. And though she rarely spoke, he never pressed her. He was patient, always patient, giving her time to adjust, to find her voice, to find her place. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of crimson and gold, Damien walked into their chambers, a serious expression on his face. Lily, who had been sitting by the window, turned her head at the sound of his footsteps. "Lily," Damien's voice was low, filled with purpose. "We need to speak." Her heart fluttered nervously in her chest, unsure of what he would say. The air around them was thick with tension, and for the first time, Lily felt the weight of what had come to pass. What would come to pass? "What is it, Damien?" she asked, her voice still quiet but more confident than before. "We are nearing the final moments of the council's approval of our bond," he began, his gaze never leaving hers. "The nobles, the lords, and the ladies, they have given their opinions, and soon the kingdom will decide." Lily swallowed hard. The court had been volatile ever since the selection ceremony, the nobles questioning his judgment, doubting the legitimacy of their bond. It was one thing for Damien to claim her as his mate, his Luna. It was another for the kingdom to accept it. "I'm ready," she said, though the doubt crept into her voice. Damien stepped closer, his presence calming as he placed his hands on her shoulders. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Lily. You already have. You've proven yourself every day simply by being who you are." Her gaze fell to the floor, uncertainty clouding her thoughts. The weight of the crown was still unfamiliar to her. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a noblewoman. She was an Omega, a servant in the eyes of many. But Damien had elevated her to his equal, and she could feel the burden of that responsibility, the pressure of his expectations, and the kingdom's expectations. "You've already claimed your place beside me," he continued, his voice tender but firm. "Now it's time for the kingdom to see it, to accept it. We can no longer hide in the shadows." The door to their chambers suddenly swung open, and a messenger entered, bowing quickly. "Your Majesty," the man said, his voice breathless. The council is ready for your presence. They await you. Damien turned to Lily, his eyes meeting hers with a fire she hadn't seen before. This was it. The moment of truth. She had stood by his side in silence, but now she had to stand in the light. Her true strength, her true voice, had to emerge. "I'm ready," she whispered again, more to herself than to him. Together they walked out of the chambers, and the halls of the castle seemed to stretch endlessly before them. The kingdom was waiting. The nobles were waiting. The world was waiting. The council room was vast, a place of power and tradition. The marble floors gleamed in the light of the chandeliers above, and the long table at the center was filled with the kingdom's most influential figures. Lords and ladies, warriors and priests, all gathered to watch the king and his Luna take their place. Damien's presence was commanding, his regal aura filling the room as he walked with purpose toward the head of the table. His eyes locked onto the seats of the nobles, and the room grew silent. Lily stood beside him, a shadow of uncertainty in her heart, but she did not falter. The first to speak was Lord Harrington, the most powerful and influential noble in the kingdom, his eyes cold and calculating as they flickered between Damien and Lily. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "we find ourselves in a difficult position. A king without a Luna, without a proper mate, is a king divided. And we all know that the strength of a kingdom lies in its unity." Damien's gaze hardened, and his voice was unwavering as he replied, "The moon goddess has chosen Lily to stand beside me. Her strength, her loyalty, her silence, everything she has endured makes her the only one worthy to be my Luna." A murmur swept through the council, and Lord Harrington's lips twisted into a sneer. "A servant," he said, his tone dismissive. "An Omega, from the kitchens, chosen as queen. This is an insult to everything we've built. How can we stand behind a leader who has forsaken tradition?" Lily's heart raced, and for a moment the weight of his words crushed her chest. She had never wanted this, had never asked for it. She was just a girl, a silent girl who had been thrust into the role of Luna, a role she had never prepared for. She could feel their eyes on her, judging her, but Damien's hand found hers, his grip steady and strong. He squeezed her hand, a silent promise, a shield. And in that moment something deep within her stirred. This was her fight, her kingdom too. She wasn't just his Luna, she was his equal. Her voice broke the silence, softer than a whisper, but filled with the weight of the truth. "I may be an Omega, but I am his, and I will stand beside him, no matter what." The room fell deathly quiet. No one moved, no one breathed. And then, slowly, a ripple of approval spread across the table. It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, but it was enough. Damien's eyes locked onto hers, a spark of pride flashing in them. "The moon goddess has spoken. This kingdom will follow our lead, or it will fall." And with those words, the fate of the Crimson Peak Kingdom was sealed. The new dawn, the days following the council were tense, but Lily felt a shift in the air. The whispers that had once been filled with doubt and disdain now held a quiet respect. They had seen her speak. They had seen her strength. Lily was no longer just the silent Omega. She had found her voice, and she had found her place beside the Alpha King. Together, Damien and Lily ruled the Crimson Peak Kingdom, not with iron fists, but with a balance of power, compassion, and unity. She had been the missing piece he had longed for, and she had found something she never thought possible, a place where she truly belonged. The moon shone brightly above the castle, and as Damien and Lily stood together on the balcony overlooking their kingdom, Lily finally understood. This was her home. And beside him, she was exactly where she was meant to be.